This is your Thursday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Hope everyone's having a good Thursday out there. Lots to get to today. Dane Moore from the Dane Moore NBA podcast does a lot of Timberwolves coverage locally. Will join me here in a little bit to talk Wolves at the break, talk about the Patrick Beverley extension, talk about the defense of this team, and just kind of the overall expectations now that they are at the All-Star break. I'm not going to call it that halfway point because they've played 59 games and there's only 23 left. But reach that point, 31-28. A lot of their goals within reach, but maybe they need to reset those and have loftier goals. Get to a little bit of Kevin O'Connell stuff. His news conference will be today at 4 p.m., formally introduced as Vikings head coach. A lot of people were a little bit nervous about that as the announcement took a couple of days after the Super Bowl, but that I don't think that was ever really in doubt or danger, and now he will be formally introduced today, and we'll hear more from him, and we'll have a lot of Kevin O'Connell coverage on Friday's show with some stuff from the press conference and talking to his college head coach as well, Tom Kraft, on the show. Also get to Tubby Smith. Looks like he is done coaching for good, stepping away in the middle of the season, and a little bit of an ode to Tubby Smith. But first, what did I miss? A couple of disappointing hockey results from Wednesday. Let's start with the gold medal Olympic game. U.S. women outshoot Canada almost by a 2-1 margin, but Canada gets that early 2-0 lead, and the U.S. cannot complete the comeback. It is a 3-2 Canada win in that gold medal game. Nothing. Again, when hockey is such a game of a one game kind of thing in hockey, you're not always going to get the result you want. It's not always going to feel like it's fair. That's why the playoffs, with the 7 game in the NHL, 7 games probably give you a better indicator of everything. But, both of these teams really, really good. And the U.S. had trouble scoring, had trouble kind of generating offense throughout its lineup for the entirety of these Olympic Games. And that hurt them again in the gold medal game. And Canada comes away with the win. Canada showed the U.S., throughout that they were probably the better of the two teams, probably a just result, even if it's not the one the U.S. team wanted. And you can read more about that, of course, Star Tribune, StarTribune.com, with our Olympics writers Rachel Blount and Lavelle E. Neal III over in Beijing. Switch to the Wild quick as well. They lose to Winnipeg, a disappointing result for the Wild as well. They've only lost twice in the last 10 games, but both of those have been against Winnipeg. This one is 6-3 final. They just didn't seem like they had much energy from the jump. Winnipeg got off to a good start. I don't know if it's a matchup thing. I think we were all kind of thinking it might be a pretty physical game. Marcus Foligno coming back and playing for the first time since a suspension levied for kneeing a Winnipeg player. It was a 2-game suspension, and lo and behold, his first game back is against Winnipeg. Thought there might be some repercussions from that. There really weren't. It was not the kind of chippy physical game we might have thought. Instead, it was just another game where the Wild against Winnipeg couldn't really get much going, kind of had the play taken to them. And afterwards, head coach Dean Evison certainly did not sound like he liked what he saw.
Well, honestly, we didn't like our game right from the start. We didn't finish checks. We were going a lot of east-west, and Winnipeg did a lot of really good things again against us. As far as we didn't get inside as much as our group does get inside. So they did a real good job in that area, but we didn't get to our game. Like you said, maybe there was a point in the second, but we thought even in the first it was like we weren't sharp in how we play the game, and obviously they played real well, and it the score was indicative. We were soft in front of our net, right? There were some wide open, some plays that we usually take care of that, in around our goaltenders, and they had so many real, obviously open nets and open looks, and we usually take care of that backside, and we didn't tonight. We lost our responsibility, and it's not just the defense. It's our low forward has to do a good job in that area too. So there's some of that as well.
Now listen, Winnipeg is not a bad team. But they're not a good team. They would not be a playoff team right now if the season ended, not even close. 21 wins, 18 losses, 8 overtime shootout losses. I mean, they're very mediocre, but for whatever reason, the Wild is struggling against them right now. I don't think that's something we have to worry about as a potential playoff matchup unless the Jets go on some kind of tear, but it is concerning if the Wild is struggling against a certain type of style or a certain type of opponent.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake for 24/7 gaming, fun restaurants and bars, and luxurious hotel rooms. And join Club M to bask in the rewards. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
Now, the Wolves had a disappointing end to the pre-All-Star portion of their schedule, losing to Toronto at home. First home loss in a very long time for the Wolves. Couldn't make a three just like the other night, but this time could not overcome it as they had against Charlotte. But break probably coming at a good time, and that's why I want to focus on just kind of what this first half, or first 59 games meant, and what we should be looking for later. So I want to bring in Dane Moore right now from the Dane Moore NBA podcast. Really happy to be joined today on Daily Delivery by Dane Moore. Does a great job with his own podcast on the Timberwolves, has been going at that for a while now, and has a lot more interesting things to talk about this season with a team that heads into the All-Star break, Dane, with a lot more momentum than in past years, looking to get into the play-in, get into the playoffs, a lot of interesting storylines. So I thought this was a good time to catch up with you. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Yeah, this is all different, right? It's like this time of year around the trade deadline, you're thinking about what pieces are the Wolves going to sell off, right? Who's the next under the guillotine of Rosas? Or now at this point, the games we're actually looking at the standings and not tankathon, and you're tracking what are the Nuggets going to win rather than are the Thunder going to win, So it's been a whole different experience. I'm enjoying it.
I've barely even looked at Tankathon. That's definitely a departure from years past. There's no need. There's no reason to.
I honestly don't think I've typed in Tankathon to my.
It's amazing.
That's big. You're right.
That is big. That is a sea change for this organization. Last year, it was trying to determine, are they going to have to give up the pick to the Warriors, which of course they ended up having to do. But
wasn't that the dumbest activity where we'd spend like okay, if you get to the third worst record, then you have a 27.3% chance of keeping it. That was one of the most depressing things ever.
It was like, could they maybe keep the pick if it's the sixth pick? It was, that was a terrible thought exercise that we all had to go through last year. But
look where we are now.
They, they go into the break with some momentum, and, they didn't do anything at the trade deadline, which I think a lot of us looked at and said that makes a certain amount of sense because of some of the chemistry they have, because of some of the cap constraints they have. But I do believe that not doing anything at the trade deadline did lead in some ways to a move they made earlier this week to extend Patrick Beverley by a year. You don't add anything to your cap with, any kind of move you made at the deadline, and it gives you a little bit more flexibility. What was your overall take on adding Beverley for next year at $13 million?
Well, Rand, I'd actually been tracking this kind of the whole season because I started hearing, right once, the Wolves kind of like come out and it's like, oh, they got like a top 10 defense. You started hearing stuff about Patrick Beverley. He became like extension eligible in like November or something. And you started hearing about like, oh, he wants this. And that kind of actually made me concerned because the word was he wanted a multi-year deal. And it was this weird conundrum where he's certainly being very helpful to the team right now, but he's 33 years old. It just would be really hard to give him a 2-3 year contract when you don't even have Cat and D'Lo under contract for that many years. So I thought we were going to run into this thing where Pat Bev was going to get really bitter, that they weren't going to understandably not give him the multi-year deal. And I just thought there was going to be this collision, and that collision ended up being a 1-year compromise where the Wolves paid probably a little bit more in that annual salary than he would have gotten on the market. But it was a compromise to keep him in this window with, now his contract expires when D'Lo's expires.
Yeah. And he's also a guy who's, for everything he's provided this year, he's not been on the court for every single game. He's missed a significant amount of games. It's never been that one big injury, but nicks, nagging things, bruises, things like that have kept him out. But no doubt of his impact when he's been on the court, part of that kind of grouping that has been among the best in net rating for this season. We're talking about Cat and D'Lo, Patrick Beverley, and Jared Vanderbilt. Doing it on defense, doing it on offense. It seems like a good mix. So that part of it makes sense. The 1-year deal, you don't usually see 1-year extensions in the middle of a season, so that part of it was a bit of a surprise. But it makes, I guess, when you add it all up, it makes a certain amount of sense for both sides.
I think it does. I think it's also, for Wolves fans, if you do have hesitation and concerns about the durability, I think there's a couple other pros to it where you can, this is more salary cap complication, but it's going to be, they were about $35 million below the luxury tax line. Now you spend 13 of that on Pat Bev. That's going to make it easier for them to spend the rest of that 22 to the tax line, just given the exceptions and how this all sort of works. Had they operated under the cap, they just wouldn't have been able to add as much stuff this summer, but they could have got somebody different than Beverley. And you pointed to with the production he's had, I don't know. It's only one more year. It's really only one more year. That's what I just keep going back to. Oh, and they could trade him on draft night now. You wouldn't have been able to do that if he was a free agent. I think that, it's part of the game too.
Not that they would want to necessarily, but it gives you more flexibility is a good way to look at it. And the flexibility they wouldn't have had probably, if maybe they would have, I suppose, but if you add someone if they would have gone for Marcus Smart or somebody like that in a deadline deal, his deal is longer. He's maybe a little bit of positional redundancy with Pat Beverley. I don't know if this deal gets done if you make that trade.
What if you wanted, there was some interest in Marcus Smart. I know it didn't ever get that close, but what if you do want Marcus Smart this summer? That was the problem, is you were going to have to send out Malik Beasley for that. Now you have a Patrick Beverley. That's just the game in the NBA this day. Having that $10 to $15 million player who you can trade as not being bad seller, that's how you upgrade. I could see a Patrick Beverley plus a pick for Marcus Smart trade on draft night. That becomes a possibility now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another Patrick Beverley note you wrote about, I believe, at least talked about, it's on Twitter, Beverley wanting them to do more switching on defense, kind of getting his wish, something you observed. I think it was the Bulls game. How did that come about? And maybe explain to me why a team that was pretty good on defense for the first, 30, 35 games wanted to do something differently and seems to be doing some things differently on that end of the floor.
Yeah, well, the Wolves, if you have been watching, that you can tell they've sort of started to shift the way they're playing defense over the past month. First and foremost, the shift is that it's way worse, which actually makes it kind of hard for me to be able to discern what you're doing. So I'd kind of been for the course of the month, been man, after being a top 10 defense, for the first half of the season, now you're bottom 10, bottom 5, and they haven't had a hard schedule. So I'm what's going on? And I heard Patrick Beverley on the bench, yelling to somebody, this is what we've been asking for all year. And now we're messing up the opportunity when coach is giving it to him. And that was what he was talking about, was switching more. And I actually get the idea of why you would go away from something that works. And I think it's because it's having a bigger picture in mind. In the playoff series, you can't run that same coverage with Cat blitzing out on the perimeter every single time. That what any good point guard, we saw Trae Young do, we saw Steph Curry do, they will get used to that and pick it apart probably right away. But even if you just show it to them 60 times and then you play them again in 2 days and you show it to them, it's that coverage that's worked so well for them. It's kind of just a hack. It just basically is trying to freak the point guard out, make them reset, and now you have a shorter shot clock to work with. That's been, and the Wolves have been great at that. They got a bunch of steals doing it. But you got to be able to throw a diversity of coverages defensively in a playoff series. So Chris Finch won't admit it. I've kind of started pinging him with it a little bit. but I don't see what the logic of why they've switched things up at all defensively. I don't, other than just like needing to do more than you're currently doing and being able to show a Trae Young 3-4 different coverages in the course of a game.
Well, that makes sense because, if there's some things that work better against inferior opponents or work better when there's an element of surprise to it. And when there's no longer an element of surprise to this coverage, like you mentioned, like if they've been doing it all year, and then you say, if there's a good point guard, if there's a good coaching system that says, this is how we're going to beat this, and we think we can beat you with this. If you can't play any other way, then you're in a problem in a playoff series.
Exactly. Yeah. I think there's a really good point about catching teams by surprise. Like, I mean, if you've been playing the Wolves for the previous 6 years Karl-Anthony Towns was in the league, they've played an extremely conservative style defense, and you're like, oh, we're playing the Wolves and Cat, like we're attacking the rim tonight. They're just going to play drop, and we're like, this is what we're going to do. This was anybody, you don't need to be X's and O's, anything. You watched the Wolves' first preseason game of the season, and you were like, wow, this is way more activity, way more aggressive, and that's translated.
Yeah, and and they can always throw that back in, once they play this way for a certain while. You don't want to give away games as you're experimenting, but they are in a position now where they can start thinking a little bit more about the future and not just winning from game to game.
You remember how people were talking about that a bunch last year when the Bucks went to the playoffs?
Yeah,
of like, we're like, wait, why are the Bucks? Are they not the number one defense again this season? And you're watching, you're like, man, they're switching a lot more, and they're not. That's not what their personnel is good at. They did that because they knew come the playoffs, we're not going to be able to drop the whole time. We're going to have to switch. So, not to compare the Wolves to like going on, but you know what I'm saying? It's the same idea of we need to have multiple defenses to be able to compete in the playoffs, like the Bucks learned.
Dane Moore predicts Wolves win NBA title this year. Seems like a good podcast headline, so I'll keep that back in the back of my mind. I'm just kidding.
Perfect.
Dane, a few more things for you. One, you mentioned Karl-Anthony Towns in the context of defense. He's certainly been more active on that end of the court. He's absolutely earned his all-star appearance this weekend. However we want to think about the rest of his career, this seems like a defining season for him.
For sure. You know what's cool about it, man, is he is not having a career high in points, not having a career high in rebounds. He's not having a career high in assists. He's not shooting a career high from 3-point range.
He's not shooting a career high in Wordle. Career high in Wordle.
Career high in Wordle. But that's it. That's like on paper, like he is not having as good of a season as he's had in prior seasons. Yet again, if you've been watching this team game in and game out, it is pretty obvious that he is having his greatest impact on winning. And to your point at the beginning, a lot of that is because he's played defense all year. I think huge credit to him on the defensive end. We talk about that scheme. You know who that's hardest for? The big. You're covering way more space there. So absolutely. The real question is, curious what you think. You think Cat's going to get all NBA?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you got it's 15 spots, right? Just 3 teams.
But only 3 centers.
Yeah, it's crowded at center. I mean, Jokic is a given, Embiid is a given, and then
all right, so now it's 1.
From there, and obviously, what the battle has been Gobert at times. It's been who else is in the mix now? I'm trying to think.
I think I think it's just going to come down to Gobert and Cat. I think Jared Allen would probably be the next one up there, and I mean, the Cavs have been great, but I think it's between Gobert and Cat, and it's a $200 million. It's a 200 Cat is eligible for a 4-year, $200 million extension if he makes all NBA this summer. That changes everything.
That bothers everything, and they could have changed that. That bothers me. That voting, which is done by us, done by the media, not by me specifically, but all NBA voting is the media, and that's a lot of money riding on decisions of people who are qualified to make those decisions, but people who also cover these.
No, not qualified. Go down the list. Look at when the votes come out, and you'll see some random dude will vote for Andre Drummond to be because he's a backup. Like it is bad. I'm making your point is we shouldn't be voting on it.
Yes.
And specifically, the people they've chosen to vote for it are terrible. It's really a joke. It's just like the All-Star voting. Wiggins is about to start on Sunday. Like this is messed up. This is not. This is It's a dumb system.
Wiggins, Levine, and Cat all at the All-Star game. That's a tip of the cap to. That's tip of the cap to Flip.
Do you hear Cat kind of rip on that last night?
No, I didn't hear that. What did he say?
He was just like, "Yeah, I mean, haven't had any continuity here. Like, look at me, Wig and Zach right now. If you would have let them build something, some magic would have happened. Like direct shot at Tibbs.
Yeah, direct. That is a shot across the bow. Although nobody necessarily could have predicted that, but it is what it is. What's your second half expectation for this year's team? It feels weird to even say second half because there's 24 games left in the season, something like that, 23 once they resume play in a week. But it feels like the top 10 is almost a given at this point. You never want to take anything for granted with the Wolves, but you would think, I mean, barring something really weird. But what do you want to see in these last 20 plus games?
I feel pretty confident in now saying that they are like a quote unquote above 500 team. That's who you seem to be, right? That's who you're presenting yourself as an above 500 team. So I don't really care what the schedule is or anything. Like if you're making a playoff push, like you got to be that. I'm looking though at specifically the teams in the standings. Dallas is 3 games ahead of them right now. Denver is 1.5 games back. And I think that 6 seed is really important, man. I don't think you want to dodge the plan, but 2, I don't know how much you're going to learn in a playoff series against the Suns or the Warriors. You're just going to get smacked.
Yeah.
Playing the Grizzlies. That would be fun.
You get to that 6 seed, you've actually got a chance because as good as the Grizzlies have been this year, as nice of the stories they've been, they are gettable.
I think the Wolves match up well with them too.
Yes.
Like they don't really have anybody for Cat, and they don't have like any big wings that overwhelm you. It's Ja, but I don't think Ja's played all that well the 3 times that they've played him. I mean, the Wolves have Pat Bev, McDaniel. Yeah, I mean, this is we're too early for this, but I think that's the dream scenario: is you get to the 6 seed and you play the Grizzlies. I think we've now we're crossing the border of exceeding expectations into getting fortunate, and but that doesn't that seem real? Like,
yeah, it does.
Do you think? Do you think they're past Dallas and Denver, or like which of the?
I think they could pass one of them. I mean, it's not going to be slam dunk. I think Denver is gettable. I mean, it depends on how healthy they are and how much Jokic, how much help he gets down the stretch.
Right.
Do they have one more with Denver? I know they played Dallas a couple times, I think, in these last handful of games. But yeah, it's gettable. I mean, here's the thing to me, and this was the hot take I promised before we started recording. We went into the year thinking, just try to scrape in, top 10, at least get into that play-in, and they would be in a much more favorable position right now if it was still just the top 8. Because if you get into, if say they don't jump into the top 6 and they wind up as the 7 or 8, which would still be a good season from where they started. Do you like their chances one game against the Clippers or the Lakers?
No.
Like even if you are the 7 or 8 and you've got 2 cracks at it, like those are veteran teams, and like say whatever you want about the Lakers, like, and even if they're 10 games worse than the Wolves this year and just scrape in as the 10 seed,
you're losing to LeBron. You're going to lose to that. You're going to lose that game. LeBron.
I mean, so they probably would have a better chance of just being a flat out playoff team this year if it wasn't for this play-in system.
I'm not a huge fan of it, just in general. Like, I haven't found it like all that exciting when even watching those games when they're happening. You're just going to win to die in the first round. It's just not. I don't know. There's not that much excitement to it, and I think it's also presenting this like weird thing where now everybody's. I mean, what are the Kings doing? Like, they're desperately buying at the trade deadline to try and make the 10 seed in the West. I mean, the Bulls did the same thing last year. It's like I'm not. Maybe it's just an old school nostalgic thing because I think we're on an island here. Most people really like it. I don't know. That's just why I'm like, skip it. Get the 6.
Yeah, exactly. That's the better scenario. And and let's be honest, like Wolves fans, beggars can't be choosers in a lot of cases. Aside from that grinding 47-win season with Jimmy Butler, and this has been a lot more fun than that, I think a lot of people would say. There just hasn't been a lot to get behind it at all. So, having at least that conversation is good. But I think the 6th seed is something to aim for, even if I would maybe put it at like a 25% chance that they jump up and get that.
Rand, I'm curious, what have you thought about the whole fan environment? But I mean, obviously on Tuesday night, we had the D-Lo, Stanford D-Lo sort of thing. You and I have talked about this a lot, over just the evolution of the Wolves fan base over time, and specifically over this past 3 years where cable's been blocked. I'm just curious, where are you at with the whole fan base thing?
I think it's interesting. I mean, I think there's like this segment of like overall Minnesota sports fandom that likes to make the cheap and easy joke of like, oh, the Minnesota has an NBA franchise. They just like completely dismiss the Wolves. But I for what I observe, and maybe I'm closer to it just because that's a lot of who I follow on Twitter, like this is a very passionate, if not overly huge fan base, but I think they're starting to warm to this. I think they've been scarred so much by false starts and things like that maybe they've been a little bit leery of getting too invested in this year's team or going all in at Target Center. You still got factors of COVID and other things that are keeping people away, I would imagine. But I think people are going to start allowing themselves to get even more excited if this second half or last 20 plus games of the year puts them in a spot where they're going to see meaningful basketball in April.
I thought last night was the turning point for exactly what you're describing. Just from being there, it was the first time I really felt that like extra ring out of fans who I don't even think of this as a bad thing. Like I'm a fair weather fan in other sports, like
sure,
but just that extra ring of people who are like, all right, like we said, like if you actually play well, we'll show up, and they did, and now fans are coming. Like I understand not coming at the beginning, and I understand the getting on the bandwagon thing, and I think you should, because it's rare here and it's fun. It reminds me of like the Twins, like back in the early 2000s, when it was like just like the smell 'em and all that sort of thing. Like where it kind of caught on right there, and that wasn't that good of a Twins team, right? But they were making the playoffs every year, and I think that's what you were you can see that with the Wolves. Maybe it's a lower seeded playoff team for the next few years, but yeah, I'm just really curious because we lost a ton of fans to the cable thing.
Yes.
A lot of people have not watched Anthony Edwards play who live here.
Yeah.
Just on TV. And I mean, it just makes me mad. Like,
yes,
that you're missing out on like a special young kid.
A generation of
good basketball.
And a generation of fans. Yeah. And then to that point too, I mean, I had Kent Herbeck on a podcast earlier this week, and he was just talking about the 87 Twins and how like nobody was really showing up to the last 2 months of that season, and they won the World Series. They won the World Series that year. Like they ended up, but they'd been so bad for so long. They hadn't even been above 500 for like 7 or 8 years. And again, like you, I'm not saying the Wolves are going to win the NBA title this year. You're like, not unlike the Bucks,
but both predicted.
We've both got there in a weird way. But I think you're right that Tuesday game might have been a certain turning point in the energy of the fans, but
it felt like it. It
felt like it. And we'll see. I mean, they've got some fun home games coming up out of the break. You have James Harden's Philly debut in that Friday game coming out of the break is what it sounds like. So that there's going to be some opportunities for some big crowds right out of the jump.
Yeah, man. I'm just looking forward to it. Like, I think we were talking before we started, like, this is just a way more fun team to cover this year, where this you come into this back-to-back this week to go on the All-Star break, and they both feel really important, because it's not only you need to be stacking up these wins, but you also need to kind of keep the good vibe that you've had going and all those sort of things. And there's just more of a night to night, like on a razor's edge of like, Ant rolled his ankle and it looks like they're going to lose to the Hornets. It just, everything feels a lot worse or a lot better afterwards. But I think that's fun. I think that's the best part of, covering a team, or as a fan, if you're just following them.
Absolutely. And you do a great job of that. Follow Dane, please listen to his podcast as much as you listen to this one. And let's do this again down the road, man.
Of course. Yeah. Wolves Talk is back.
It's back, baby. It never left. It never left in some circles, but it's easier now to talk about than who's their third string point guard of the future.
Exactly. Things are improving. They're easier to talk about. And I'm glad you're here talking about them. You're doing your part. 25%. For one of the 4 teams, it's usually 25%, Rand. That's how it works.
All right. Thanks, Dane.
See you later.
Like I said, break probably coming at a good time. I bet some of these guys could use a little rest. I think Anthony Edwards could use a recharge. I think D'Angelo Russell could maybe use a recharge, get everybody a little bit healthier. Cat's been nursing something with his hand that flared up again the other day, so maybe they'll get a little bit of a breather here. I know Cat's got to go to the All-Star festivities. There's stuff going on, but still, a little bit of a mental break from having the day-in, day-out grind of the NBA schedule. I think that would do this team well. Like I said at the jump, Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell will be introduced at a 4 p.m. news conference today. I'm going to be listening very intently to kind of hear some specifics of his plan and his vision. I don't know how much he'll be able to lay out today, how much of that is still a work in progress, but that's really what I want to know. I mean, sometimes you get like did he win the press conference? How did he present himself? What did we think of this guy? And I think first impressions are important, but this season, this offseason is going to come up on them really quickly. Ben Gessling and I talked about that the other day. They're going to need to make some decisions quickly, and I want to know from this Thursday news conference kind of what direction we might at least get a hint that they are going to head. So that is what I will be listening for today and be bringing you on Friday's show. Let's finish with the cooler. Tubby Smith sounds like he is walking away from coaching. He was at High Point right now. He's had COVID twice in the last year. He hasn't coached for the last few weeks. Turning the team over to his son, G.G. Smith. He is 70 years old. Tubby is. If this is it for Tubby, what a great career for him. I know his Gophers tenure maybe didn't go exactly as people wanted it to, but always somebody who coached with dignity and, if we're being honest, presided over the most successful era of Gophers basketball since Clem Haskins. And it's not a crowded field. It's not it's not a robust field when you're talking about Dan Munson and Richard Pitino. Right now Ben Johnson taking over. We'll see what happens there. But Tubby Smith made 3 NCAA tournaments in 6 years. The year he got fired, he won an NCAA tournament game. Norwood Teague couldn't wait to get rid of him. And the alternative since then, even if we thought that was a good move at the time, the program certainly has not gotten further than it got with Tubby Smith. So if this is it for Tubby, a tip of the cap to him and what he has accomplished in college basketball, including, let's not forget, a national championship with Kentucky. That will do it for today's show. Like I said, lots of Viking stuff coming up tomorrow, including highlights from Kevin O'Connell's introductory news conference and an interview with his college head coach, Tom Kraft. Thanks for joining me here today. Be back at it again on Friday.